For 3 years, the night shift clerk at Miller's Grocery had been the most unremarkable employee anyone could imagine. Quiet, reliable, always volunteered for the late shifts nobody else wanted. What the store management didn't know was why Tommy Morrison preferred working alone. Tonight, they would find out. Welcome to Faces Behind Stories. Before we continue this intense story of hidden courage and split-second decisions, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Miller's Grocery Store sat on the corner of 5th and Madison like a beacon of suburban normalcy. Open 24 hours, it served the late-night crowd of shift workers, insomniacs, and college students cramming for exams with energy drinks and instant ramen. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly, casting everything in harsh white light that made the tired faces of midnight customers look even more exhausted. Tommy Morrison had worked the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift for 3 years straight, ever since moving to this quiet Colorado town. At 42, he was older than most of the other employees, but he never complained about the hours. While everyone else fought for day shifts and weekends off, Tommy specifically requested the overnight slot. Store management thought he was just dedicated. His coworkers assumed he needed the night differential pay. They were both wrong. The truth was simpler and more complicated than anyone guessed. Tommy Morrison worked nights because he couldn't sleep anyway. Hadn't slept well in over a decade, not since coming home from places that didn't exist on any map. The grocery store gave him something to do with the dark hours, a purpose that didn't involve staring at the ceiling and remembering things he'd rather forget. He was a model employee, always on time, never called in sick, knew the location of every item in the store by heart. Customers liked him because he was helpful without being pushy, polite without being fake. He had an easy smile and patient demeanor that made elderly customers feel comfortable asking him to reach high shelves or explain the difference between products. What none of them knew was that Tommy Morrison scanned every customer who walked through those automatic doors with the practiced eye of someone trained to identify threats from 100 yards away. That his friendly smile masked constant situational awareness that categorized every person as either neutral, friendly, or potential hostile. That the way he organized the stockroom wasn't just efficiency, it was tactical positioning that gave him clear sight lines and multiple escape routes. Tommy Morrison looked like a grocery store clerk. But Tommy Morrison was a ghost. Staff Sergeant Tommy Morrison, United States Marine Corps, Force Reconnaissance, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and classified missions in places the government would never acknowledge. Expert in reconnaissance, direct action, and what the military politely called special operations other than war. He'd earned his silence the hard way, through operations where success was measured not by medals, but by the absence of headlines. The transition to civilian life had been rough. The VA counselor said it was normal. Difficulty sleeping, hypervigilance, problems with loud noises and crowds. They had pamphlets about PTSD and support groups for veterans trying to readjust. What they didn't have was a cure for the feeling that civilian life was too quiet, too safe, too far removed from the razor's edge where Tommy had lived for over a decade. So he'd found the night shift at Miller's Grocery. It wasn't the same as standing watch in a forward operating base, but it scratched the same itch. Someone had to be awake, alert, watching. Someone had to stand guard while the world slept. Tonight started like any other. Tommy clocked in at 9:55 p.m., 5 minutes early as always. Martha, the evening shift supervisor, gave him the rundown. Delivery truck coming at 2 a.m., dairy case needed restocking. Some teenage shoplifters had been hitting the candy aisle. Standard stuff for a Tuesday night. By 10:30, the store had settled into its overnight rhythm. A handful of customers wandered the aisles, 2 college kids arguing over pizza flavors, an elderly man carefully comparing prices on canned soup, a woman in scrubs probably coming off a hospital shift. Tommy restocked the bread aisle, keeping one eye on the security mirrors that gave him a view of the entire store. That's when he noticed the car. It was parked across the street in the 24-hour laundromat parking lot, engine running, lights off. Dark sedan, tinted windows, positioned for quick egress onto 5th Street. By itself, not unusual. People did laundry at all hours. But Tommy's training had taught him to notice patterns, and this car had been there for 20 minutes without anyone getting out. He continued his work, but part of his mind was cataloging details. License plate partially obscured by a strategically placed air freshener. Two figures visible in the front seats, occasionally moving but never exiting the vehicle. The driver kept checking his watch. Surveillance or coincidence? In Tommy's experience, it was rarely coincidence. At 11:15, the situation escalated. Three men entered the store together through the automatic doors. That alone wasn't unusual. Friends shopping together, roommates splitting a grocery run. But everything about their behavior set off alarm bells in Tommy's trained mind. They moved wrong. Too synchronized, too aware of each other's positions. They didn't split up to shop efficiently like normal customers would. Instead, they stayed in formation, with one man taking point while the other two flanked him. Their eyes weren't on the products. They were scanning the store layout, noting camera positions, counting customers and employees. Tommy recognized the pattern. It was called a battle drill, and these men had practiced it. He continued stocking shelves, but his hands had unconsciously shifted position, no longer the relaxed posture of a clerk organizing inventory, but the ready stance of a Marine preparing for contact. Years of muscle memory overrode 3 years of civilian routine. The lead man was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of broad shoulders that came from serious gym time. His jacket hung loose in a way that suggested concealed carry. The second man was shorter, but moved with the fluid precision of someone comfortable with violence. The third hung back near the entrance, casual but alert, blocking the exit route. Tommy had seen this formation before, not in a grocery store, but in hostile territory where three-man teams moved through buildings with deadly intent. They weren't here to shop. The realization hit him like cold water. After 3 years of quiet nights and mundane routine, the war had finally followed him home. He considered his options with the calm precision that had kept him alive through dozens of combat missions. Call the police. Response time was 6 to 8 minutes, probably too long if these men were here for what he thought they were here for. Hit the silent alarm, same response time, and it would only serve to escalate the situation before help arrived. Or he could handle it himself, the way he'd been trained to handle threats for 22 years before he ever touched a price gun or learned to operate a cash register. Tommy made his choice. He walked toward the back of the store, moving with the unhurried pace of an employee finishing his shift duties. To any observer, he was just restocking the cereal aisle. In reality, he was positioning himself behind hard cover with clear sight lines to all three hostiles. That's when the first gunman drew his weapon. "Everybody on the ground, now! This is a robbery!" The college kids screamed. The elderly man dropped his canned soup with a crash that echoed through the store. The woman in scrubs raised her hands and slowly knelt beside the pharmacy counter. But Tommy Morrison didn't move. He stayed exactly where he was, crouched behind the end-cap display of breakfast cereals, calculating angles and distances with the cold precision of a Force Recon Marine. 22 years of training had just activated. The lead gunman swept his weapon across the store, shouting instructions at the terrified customers. "Wallets, phones, jewelry, everything in the bag, move." His partners spread out with practiced efficiency. One took position near the registers, controlling the front of the store. The other moved toward the back, herding customers into the center aisles where they could be easily controlled. Professional, coordinated. These weren't desperate junkies looking for quick cash. This was a team with training and experience. But they'd made one critical error in their planning. They'd assumed the night shift clerk was just another civilian. Tommy waited until the third gunman passed his position, then moved with the silent precision that had once made him one of the deadliest reconnaissance Marines in the Corps. 22 years of muscle memory compressed into fluid motion as he rose from behind the cereal display and struck. His hand clamped over the gunman's mouth before the man could shout a warning. His other arm wrapped around the throat in a blood choke that would render the target unconscious in seconds. The weapon clattered to the floor as the gunman's vision went black. One down. Tommy dragged the unconscious body behind the pharmacy counter, zip-tied the man's hands with cable ties from the electronics section, and appropriated his weapon, a Glock 19, standard criminal issue. The familiar weight felt natural in his hands after 3 years of stocking shelves and scanning barcodes. The other two gunmen hadn't noticed their partner's disappearance yet. They were focused on terrifying customers and emptying the cash registers, standard smash-and-grab tactics that worked on unprepared civilians. But Tommy Morrison wasn't unprepared, and he definitely wasn't a civilian. He moved through the store like a ghost, using the tall shelf displays for concealment as he closed distance on the second target. Canned goods aisle provided cover. Frozen foods offered concealment. The dairy section gave him a flanking position on the gunman controlling the registers. Force Recon had taught him that the key to close-quarters combat wasn't firepower. It was positioning, timing, and the element of surprise. Use the environment, control the engagement, strike when the enemy least expects it. The second gunman never saw him coming. Tommy emerged from behind the frozen pizza display like a predator materializing from shadows. The gunman spun toward him, weapon rising, but 22 years of combat experience beat desperation every time. Tommy's first shot took him center mass, dropping him instantly. 2 down. The lead gunman spun at the sound of gunfire, finally realizing that his simple robbery had become something entirely different. His eyes found Tommy across the store, no longer a grocery clerk in a red apron, but a Marine with a weapon and the kind of cold calm that comes from surviving real combat. "Who the hell are you?" the gunman shouted, his own weapon wavering as fear crept into his voice. Tommy stepped into the center aisle, Glock held in a perfect Weaver stance, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to giving orders under fire. "Staff Sergeant Morrison, United States Marine Corps, you picked the wrong store." The final gunman's face went white as he realized what he was facing. This wasn't some scared civilian he could intimidate. This was a professional warrior who'd been waiting 3 years for exactly this moment. The standoff lasted 5 seconds. The gunman's nerve broke first. He spun toward the exit, abandoning his robbery and his unconscious partners in a desperate sprint for the automatic doors. But Tommy had anticipated the move, had been controlling the angles from the moment the engagement began. 1 shot, center mass. The gunman dropped 3 feet from the exit, his weapon skittering across the linoleum floor. 3 down, store secure, civilians safe. Tommy methodically secured the weapons, checked on the hostages, and called 911. His voice was calm, professional, giving precise information about casualties and requesting medical response. Just another night at the office, except the office was a grocery store, and the paperwork would be handled by the police. The first responders arrived to find 3 gunmen neutralized, 0 civilian casualties, and a grocery store clerk who'd somehow single-handedly stopped an armed robbery with military precision. Detective Sarah Chen was the first investigator on scene. She'd seen plenty of robberies gone wrong, but never anything like this. 3 professional criminals taken down by a store employee who showed no signs of stress or shock. "Mr. Morrison," she said, studying the scene with experienced eyes, "can you walk me through what happened?" Tommy's story was simple and consistent. He'd been stocking shelves when the robbery began. He'd acted to protect the customers and himself using reasonable force. Everything by the book, everything justified under Colorado's self-defense laws. But Detective Chen wasn't buying the simple version. The shot placement was too precise. The tactical movement was too professional. The calm demeanor was too practiced. "Military background?" she asked quietly. "Some," Tommy replied. She nodded, recognizing the boundaries of what could and couldn't be discussed. Some veterans didn't talk about their service, especially the ones who'd served in places that required security clearances. "Thank you for your service," she said, both then and tonight. The customers Tommy had saved were more effusive in their gratitude. The college kids called him a hero. The elderly man shook his hand with tears in his eyes. The woman in scrubs, a nurse as it turned out, thanked him for keeping her safe so she could get home to her children. But Tommy just nodded and went back to stocking shelves. There was still work to do, and the night shift didn't end until 6 a.m. The story made the local news, but Tommy declined all interview requests. He wasn't interested in fame or recognition. He'd done what needed to be done, the same way he'd always done what needed to be done. The store owner offered him a promotion, a raise, a transfer to day shift with better hours and more respect. Tommy politely declined. He preferred the night shift. Someone had to watch the store while the world slept. 3 weeks later, Detective Chen stopped by during her patrol. No official business, just checking in. Tommy was restocking the produce section, arranging apples with the same methodical precision he'd once used to clean his rifle. "The menu stopped," she said quietly. They were part of a larger operation, armed robberies across 3 states. Your intervention saved a lot of people from becoming victims. Tommy nodded but didn't stop arranging fruit. We could use someone with your skills, she continued. Police department, private security, federal agencies, someone who knows how to handle situations like this. Tommy looked at her for a long moment, then back at the apples. I like it here, he said simply. It's quiet. But as he said it, Tommy realized it wasn't entirely true anymore. For 3 years, he'd been hiding from his past, trying to disappear into the anonymous routine of civilian life. Tonight had reminded him that some things you can't hide from, and some skills never really fade. He was still a Marine, still a protector, still someone who stood watch while others slept safely. The only difference was that now his post was aisle 7 of Miller's grocery, and his mission was keeping the late-night customers safe from whatever dangers might walk through those automatic doors. Because someone had to be ready. Someone had to watch. Someone had to stand between good people and the darkness that sometimes came calling at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. Tommy Morrison had found his place in the civilian world. It just happened to be the same place he'd always been, standing guard, staying alert, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And if that meant spending the rest of his nights stocking shelves and scanning barcodes, that was fine with him. It was honest work, quiet work, the kind of work that let him serve without anyone having to know exactly how or why he was qualified to serve. The next night, Tommy was back at his post. Same red apron, same name tag, same helpful smile for the customers who needed assistance finding items or reaching high shelves. But now the store felt different, not just a place to work the overnight hours, but a position to defend. Because Tommy Morrison had remembered something important. A Marine never really retires. He just finds a new mission. And his mission was keeping Miller's grocery safe, one night shift at a time. This story was brought to you by Faces Behind Stories. Have you ever encountered someone whose quiet expertise suggested hidden depths? Tell us about them in the comments below and let us know what city you're watching from today. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to support the channel. We honor the guardians who continue serving one shift at a time.